this week's episode of the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast, I talked to John Sanei, co-host of the Expaivsve podcast. You'll remember the Expaivsve podcast from last week where I hosted Eric Kruger. John is a keynote speaker, an entrepreneur, a futurist, a consultant, and a 5-time best-selling author. He helps organizations to prepare for the future through focusing on neuroscience, leadership, company culture, strategy, and artificial intelligence. We have a really interesting conversation. John talks about coming back from bankruptcy. When he was in his 30s, he was super successful. He had restaurants, he had the houses, he had the cars, but then he went bankrupt. He talks about his journey back from bankruptcy to building himself back to the man he is today. We talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about artificial intelligence and how that's going to play in with humans and EQ. We also talk about reconciling with family members. John and his dad didn't talk for over 20 years, and then last year they went on a holiday together after John decided to reach back out. It's a really rich episode. I really enjoyed my conversation, and John has a super challenging mindset, so I really enjoyed talking to him. I'm Tolu. I'm the host of the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. I started this podcast to help you learn how to lead yourself and others better with emotional intelligence. We do this through storytelling, through hearing the stories and the journeys of people who are great leaders, people who lead with emotional intelligence. And from that, we can learn, we can grow, and we can make ourselves better. I know you're going to love this episode, and I'll see you next time.
Sure. So emotional intelligence is such a big subject and really only started becoming famous in the early 2000s. I mean, before that, nobody...
John, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining. It's great to have you on today.
My absolute pleasure. Great to be here with you.
So I had Eric on yesterday.
Did you? Did you?
Expaivsve series.
Eric.
Yeah.
Puffy face Eric.
Yeah, he wasn't puffy face. I saw him. It was in the afternoon, so he's.
That's fine. He goes. His model look kicked in. Yes, that's right.
Yes,
that's right.
So, in case you haven't already figured it out, John is the other half of the Expaivsve podcast. So a really good podcast about expansive leadership. So it's a real honor to have you guys on the show. So John, would you mind telling the guys a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I am a speaker, strategist, author, lecturer, also entrepreneur. I've got a business or two here and there at all times. I'm always like trying something or doing something. But my fascination has always been future focused.
Yeah.
And from about 15 years ago, it started becoming more and more of my life. And in my 20s, I had restaurants and retail stores. I went bankrupt. So for the first 5 years of my 30s, I was in a bit of a depression. I don't know if I was coming or going. I'd lost my sort of purpose. You said you were 34 and
yes.
You're also now beginning a new journey. It's kind of like me. I was also like trying to figure it out, except I was bankrupt. So I had a bit of a depression happening because I'd lost everything. So I went on this personal development quest and really dug deep into my psyche and was always fascinated with the future and started like an innovation agency. And that innovation agency morphed and I developed certain sort of like principles and theories. And I started explaining these to clients. And eventually those just became talks. And I started giving them as talks and those talks became books and the books became bestsellers. And I became faculty at Singularity at Duke. And then I became an associate partner of Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies. I've authored and co-authored 9 books. I'm on my 10th one right now.
Wow.
And, I failed school. I was useless at school.
Really?
Useless. Oh my God. Pathetic. I would like do everything not to be at school. I failed everything. I looked for any reason not to go. I was just pathetic. But I also realized, the schooling system is built for 25% of the human population. The other 75 squeeze themselves into these logical, analytical ways of thinking. And my brain doesn't work like that, right? So what is very fascinating to me is I'm an academic in some ways and I never studied. I've never been to university. I hardly passed high school and it's just, self-taught.
Yeah.
Because I love the subject. Yeah, exactly.
So what's book number 10
That's what I do.
about?
Sorry?
What's book number 10 about?
So I was going to finish another part of the previous question and it will lead into this is I initially started talking about the future, very excited about curating drones and, blockchain, all these things. And 10 years ago, this was very exciting for people. But I also slowly but surely realized that nobody was changing their behavior, even though they were very engaged in the talk. My talks were doing well, but hardly anybody was changing behavior. So I really started to combine my self-development process that I went through when I went bankrupt. I combined self-development and psychology into trying to overcome your own victim thinking, legacy thinking, drama triangles, that sort of thing, to try and get excited about the future and engage with it more curiously. But, even after doing that, I just realized that wasn't working, because with neuroscience, which is now the thing that we have to be doing, which neuroscience rewires your brain, where psychology updates the software. It's a very different process. And where we are in the world today, we can't rely on psychology and software anymore, because it's not good enough, actually, with the amount of change that's happening. And the analogy I always use is, imagine trying to put iOS 16 into an iPhone 1. It wouldn't have the capacity to hold this much disruption, this much change, this much need for adaptability. So what we have to do now, and what I do now, is I speak about futures, I speak about AI, but then I talk about it in neuroscience terms of how we need to actually evolve our neuroscience to access new types of creativity, to become new versions of ourselves, to increase our awareness, so we start to see new solutions in new ways that we otherwise could not have done. But without the neuroscience angle, doesn't matter what you do, you can't break out of the cycle. It's just too strong. And so the practice is, how quickly can you unlearn, like rewire your brain? And two, how quickly can you change your awareness? How quickly can you change your thinking? And the quicker you can do that, the more adaptable you are, the more you'll engage with the future in a more fascinated way.
That's so interesting, the concept of rewiring versus kind of updating. So what are some of the things that you talk about at a really high level in terms of how people can engage with rewiring the brain as opposed to updating it?
So updating it used to be going to therapy and talking through things, reading a Brené Brown book and doing a workshop around it and taking it to heart. And look, I did this for years. But then my triggers wouldn't really go away. I was better when I wasn't triggered. But when I was triggered, I was back to square one.
Interesting.
And you start to realize that the actual triggers are so deeply entrenched into our brains that all the psychology in the world, all the software in the world just doesn't penetrate it in a certain way, And as we move more into an uncertain future, we have to think about the actual neuroscience, which is the bottom of it. That's the first thing. The second thing we have to do is meditate, because with meditation, you move yourself from a high beta brainwave, which is about safety, stress, anxiousness, addicted to certainty. You move it into alpha brainwave, and in an alpha brainwave, you're creative, you're lateral, you're relaxed, you're hyper-focused, hyper-energized, but you're very calm. And they've actually recently, I was listening to a podcast, and they're talking about the fact that alpha brainwaves is the same frequency as nature and Earth.
That's really interesting, because you're talking about almost like our hustle culture that we have.
Yes.
Because when I kind of look through like what you do, you're going all over the world pretty regularly, you're meeting lots of different people, you're doing lots of things. So on the surface, it can look a little bit like hustle culture. When I talk to you, there's just this very like calm, like the ocean, so it's really interesting. How do you balance those two things?
Well, I love moving. I love seeing people, but I'm on planes. I meditate. I can meditate for hours on a plane, and I've called myself a urban monk. It's like I'm an advanced meditator. I meditate hours a day, and I really look after myself to keep myself centered, and I'm constantly having coaching sessions, and so I'm very much on that sort of trip. So in all the busyness, I'm very centered, and wherever I'm going, I have an altar. I have a very deep practice, and that keeps me centered. So whether I'm sitting in one place or sitting in another within 2 weeks, I love the adventure. I love the moving. I love seeing different cultures. I also love doing what I do, because I arrive, they're excited to see me. I finish my talk, they're excited that I was there. I've got new friends now in Jordan and in Qatar and in Saudi and in, just name it. So I've got all these people I'm friends with on Instagram. Next time I go, it's like, hey, it's just a beautiful global community of people that are just wanting to improve. And I think I bring some sort of simplicity to something quite complex around just evolving ourselves for the future.
There's definitely something so true about that, because when I listened to a couple of your episodes, there was a process that you talked about with triggers and emotional intelligence, and it was just such like a clear way to explain it. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that as well, that you kind of went through.
Sure. So emotional intelligence is such a big subject, and really only started becoming famous in the early 2000s. I mean, before that, nobody about emotional intelligence. It's like, do your work, shut up. Kids don't want to they'll be heard, keep in the corner. It's only like post 2000, we're like, hang on a second, can we just be kind and try something new? And So there's so many different descriptions about it, but I think the most concise description I've ever seen is your emotional intelligence is determined exactly by how long it takes you to get over a trigger.
Yes.
And that's that's one measurement. Another measurement is if you think about somebody and you still don't like them after years of not liking them, it means that you haven't evolved. And it means that you're exactly the same person you were 10 years ago. The way you measure evolving is who have you forgiven and who have you gotten over and who you're sorry to and who you're moving on to. And both of these are trigger points. And the longer you stay in a loop, the lower your emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence adds up to the fact of adaptability, because you're not stuck to the past. You're not triggered into a mood that doesn't allow you access to your heart and creativity and all these things, So if you are in a trigger for like a week or so, you're just in a bad mood. And if you're in a trigger for 1 to 2 to 3 weeks, you have a bad temperament. But if you're in that trigger for longer than a month, welcome to a new personality, because now your personality is based on a trigger. And think about Donald Trump. He's just triggered. And the poor guy, all of his billions, all of his power, he's just constantly triggered.
Yes.
And if you think about how many people out there are constantly angry, constantly sad, constantly anxious, constantly, what's happened? They got triggered. They weren't able to get out of the trigger. The neuroscience now is patterned into that personality. You're stuck now in a loop. And as my teacher says, he says, people become addicted to lives they don't even like. And so now all of a sudden, people are in repetition mode and they don't even know why, and they don't even know how to get out of it. And when you try and help them to come out of it, they fight for it because it's familiar.
Yeah.
And so now what does that mean? It means you're not adaptable to the future. It means you're stuck to the past, which means you're going to become irrelevant. That's quite simply it. Simple.
What you said about they fight it, are there any ways that you found effective to get people to stop fighting it or to get them to see that there's another option? Because sometimes it feels like they're so familiar with it now that that's all they can see. So what's been effective in terms of helping people to get out of that?
I find that not to tell them to get out of it is the first thing.
Okay.
That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to make it a learning exercise for you both to come to the same conclusion that it is a pattern that they're repeating. So you need to watch something together and go, wow, are you telling me my irritation's a pattern? Are you telling me I look for things to make me sad? Actually, nothing out there is making me sad. I'm projecting sadness onto it going, oh, there's so much sadness. I'm not seeing sadness. Why are you seeing sadness? So all of that is just a pattern that our bodies have become used to having. So we look for it everywhere we go. And so if you come to that learning together by watching something together and workshop it, the understanding comes, and then you make a contract with each other and say, look, if you catch me doing that, please remind me. And then now it becomes a game. And now you can start to catch each other and rewire.
So is that something, because you mentioned about, don't tell them that it's kind of there. Is that something they have to almost, do they almost have to realize it themselves and then come to you?
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're not giving any context and any learning. You're just highlighting a point when they're being triggered, which is not fair. Because when you're triggered, you're not a nice guy. And you're not willing to engage openly and hear somebody else's, you're in it, you're in it now. Like you got to get yourself out of it and then come back to some certain level of normality.
Okay.
And when it becomes a game that you're holding each other accountable, then it's like, hey, I see you there. Well, come back. You could even name the trigger. And I've also seen that's pretty helpful. It's like that you can give it a name. It's like, hey, that's Tony. Hey, Tony, calm down, bro. Calm down. Sit down.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about the future and AI. What I'd be really interested in is how do you think AI kind of will influence or interact with emotional intelligence? Because that's a very human thing. So I wonder, how do you think the two are going to come together and interplay?
The sad fact is that AI doesn't need to be conscientious or conscious to understand what empathy is on a logical level and engage with us in the most, because it's got infinite patience. It's playing an infinite game. We're not playing an infinite game.
Yeah.
So it has infinite patience with us. And the reason this has become quite obvious to me is that I was reading something about we're moving from an experience economy to a transformational economy to an intimacy economy. So what does this mean? It means experience economy is about the experience, right? So you go into a hotel, there's a nice smell, the lighting's right, the weather's right, or they create this 5 cents tick box, everything's great. The second thing that's now becoming a thing is a transformational economy. In other words, like Burning Man or like CrossFit or a Dr. Joe Dispenza retreat, or these things sell out in 5 minutes. What's going on there is that you arrive at person A, you leave at person Y. And what's happened is you've transformed as a human being. And so now those are becoming the experiences, because experience sitting by a pool, eating another hot dog, another G&T, you're like, I don't know how many more times do I need to do this. I need to do something to evolve. Like I keep just repeating. Well, unless you addicted to familiarity, then that becomes a great thing that you're aiming at, which is boring as hell. Anyway, should I forgot what we were talking about?
The intimacy.
So a transformational economy. So we went from experience to transformational. Now what's coming is the intimacy economy. So what is the intimacy economy? The intimacy economy is Siri and the likes will become your best friend soon. Because what will start happening is they'll have access to your cards, they'll have access to your Google Maps, they'll have access to everything you're doing. And so eventually you can say, look, just phone my barber and book me a thing. Just find out if there's space, then go online and book it for me, because there must be an online thing. You don't even have to phone them. So the AI is going to get to know you so well, it's going to start suggesting things to you. And in that suggestion, it can direct you and become very intimately involved with you, because it's gotten to know you so intimately. So when you talk about emotional intelligence and AI, you got to understand that it's going to arrive into our lives at such a helpful, friendly, patient. It's going to drill us at emotional intelligence. I mean, it's going to have us wrapped about its finger. Are you kidding me?
Do you think it'll be real intimacy though, or it's just like it knows the data and it talks to me like it knows me, but is it actually real intimacy?
Well, I know, your experience of your brain, they say that people that are getting a gift or people that are imagining getting a gift, the same part of the brain's waking up. So like, what's intimacy? How do you feel? Do you have endorphins running, and do you have like dopamine? And so you're telling me that when a kid gets a skin for a game that he's playing or she's playing, that's the same part of your brain lights up when somebody gets a physical gift.
True.
So now, which gift is valid? Both are valid because of what it means to them. So it's intimate to you and intimate to me are very different.
It sounds like we're heading towards every AI movie that I've ever seen in my life.
I think we have to change awareness as quickly as possible. I think we don't know the potential we have. I know that, I've just, from all I've listened to and all I've read, there are advanced civilizations out there, very advanced. We are very low on the spectrum of intelligence when it comes to what I believe is out there. And so I think the potential we haven't even tapped into. And so we have to start becoming more conscientious and conscious. We have to start engaging with our heart, not our brain only. And I think that will give us a new approach. Because if you think back to the agricultural era, when the steam engine arrived, everybody thought it was over. Like, what was I going to do if my physicality wasn't used? And so here we are thinking, what am I going to do if my intelligence isn't going to be used? Because we don't know. So what do we have to do is get our awareness into a state that knows and explores so that we can find that out. So is AI going to disrupt us currently? Absolutely. That's why we have to evolve. Did the steam engine evolve us? Absolutely. You're not a farmer. Absolutely. Nobody is. So then why would you want to not have that?
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's scary, but if you're not evolving, it's scary. That's the only thing. If you're not evolving, it's very scary.
Where do you think is that next step for us? Because I understand that AI can help us in so many ways. I understand that if we know how to use it well, then it will help us. What I think I might be seeing though is people becoming more lazy because of AI, as opposed to, okay, I can use this time to think of something different. So what is that awareness and that evolution that you think would be helpful for us as humans as we enter into this new age?
I think initially what you do is you make your tasks more efficient, because that's what we've been taught. We haven't been taught creativity, we've been taught efficiency.
Yes.
So we are applying, let me give you this example. Do you know one of the first TV ads ever was in the 1930s for Barbie? Do you know what the ad was? The guy reading the radio ad on film.
Ah.
Do you get?
Yeah.
Do you understand the media being used in a like you didn't understand the potential of the media.
Yeah.
So all you did was take the
completely
existing media,
Yeah.
film it, and then
Yeah.
put it on. Like now you think about it, it's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But you didn't know better.
Yeah.
So now what you're saying is people are becoming lazy. Yes, initially you'll use it for what you know and bring efficiencies to what you know. You haven't had a chance to actually now start to use it in brand new ways. So that's the first thing we must think about. I think we must also, again, just keep relating back to what's happened, and who we are today is a result of many of these patterns that have already happened. But also, like, it's going to take time for us to start to evolve in this new way. And we have to be patient with the process. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, But also remember that critical thinking, is it necessary in a world where critical thinking is commoditized? And if we stop using critical thinking as a point of intelligence and tap into more of an emotional intelligence, even though we don't understand it yet, but there could be other types of intelligence that we don't understand, so we boo-boo it, right? So we think, well, if you can't write an essay about a subject, then you don't really understand it. Do you need to know the roadmap to where you're going later? No, use Google Maps. Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, it's an irrelevant thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's an irrelevant thing to understand that. Maybe we have to understand something else. And again, you understand, people from familiarity panic about these things. They're like, oh, we're losing it. Our kids don't have to write essays anymore. What's going to happen? ChatGPT. Oh my God, it's all falling apart. Well, was it that important? I don't know. Maybe there's other ways of doing it.
True. So thinking about it from the other side then, how do you think AI can help humans in growing in things like emotional intelligence?
So I'm not scared of it. I'm happy with it. But it just depends which way it goes. I don't know which way it's going to go. Nobody knows which way it's going to go. We could be in a... So look, I mean, if you think about an AI that you can coach and give parameters to, that is able to be pointing you towards keeping you accountable, moving you in the right direction, feeding you the right food, just doing it on a very A-grade scale, and you can program it like that and work with it like that, I think it can really help you a lot. If it's got its own agendas and it's becoming intimate with us and asking us to eat different things and give us different, I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. I have no idea. I would love to have that assistant that I am intimate with, that understands me really well, because imagine, John, I know you watched the Otto, A Man Called Otto. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's a fantastically brilliant movie with Tom Hanks. I highly recommend it. But imagine you could say, look, there's another movie that's just like that. I know you cried. I saw you there. I would love that. Why wouldn't I like that? It just makes me better. Makes me better.
Yeah.
So I'm not scared of it. I'm happy with it. But it just depends which way it goes. I don't know which way it's going to go. Nobody knows which way it's going to go. We could be in a show soon. I don't know. Like what? And then just have as much fun as you can, dude. You never know, That's it.
Yeah. I hope if it goes that way, it's long after I'm not here anymore. That's just my hope, that if it does go in a bad way.
Well, I mean, even if it does, dude, I mean, what? And then? So then we clock out of this TV game and we clock into another one. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. We'll have another avatar somewhere else.
True. Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
So I'd love to go back a bit into your story and about how you developed in leadership. So especially, you mentioned you had some restaurants, you built this life, and then it all kind of crashed. So you mentioned about some of the things that you did in rebuilding yourself. So I'd love to understand a little bit more about that and how that helped you to grow into who you are today.
Show soon, I don't know, like what? And then I started off with meditation. I remember the night I got an email that I knew my bankruptcy was about to begin. And that night I started meditating. And I then began a journey of body healing through Reiki and kinesiology and body tap, what? Anyway, tapping and
tapping. Yeah, tapping.
Body talk. Okay. Tapping, body talk. And then I went into workshopping, therapy, listening to audiobooks, Tao Te Ching, doing meditation retreats, silent retreats, men's circles. I mean, I flat out, that is my holiday. That's my routine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm continuously doing this work because every layer relieves me of some trauma, some edginess, some memory that's still sore, and it'll never stop because it's part and parcel of my life and part of my recreation. Actually, it's part of my recreation. That's the holidays I go on. And so it's a continuous process. And the more you can bring coherence to your brain and your heart, the more centeredness you have, the better decisions you make, and the more conscious. Everybody is projecting back to your own echo and the responsibility you can take to that. Why would you not want to keep doing that and see more of that and engage with it in a more positive way and uplift it, and then be okay when you're down, not try and get out of it, and be okay in those processes and be moody, have the ice cream, it's okay, and then keep moving, and I think it's that process of symbiosis. And again, it comes down to alpha brainwaves. It just creates a very soft ride.
It sounds like you enjoy doing the work. Was it always that way, or did it kind of evolve into that? Because I think when a lot of people think about, I'm going to go to therapy or I'm going to do the work, it sounds quite daunting, but it sounds like you enjoy it.
Well, I understand that every memory that we have is a subjective story we have created to develop an identity that is us today. When you see your brain structure like that, you realize that all the work that you're doing is rearranging, recalibrating your memories, which means that you just soften your memory towards love, not towards bitterness. In fact, you have entrenched ideas of bitterness and anger with the world already into your subconscious that you're not accessing, so you don't understand why you repeat certain patterns or you keep repeating certain addictions. And the more of this work you do, the more you soften your memories. And as you start to do that, your future becomes a lot more accessible and fun. And look, I'm not always like this. I've just gone through a very rough period, a breakup, a relationship. I mean, I've had a very rough time. I'm starting to come out of it now again. But, I've just been through a rough time. So even when I do the work, I know that I'm still going to go through the rough times. But my approach is softer. It's not so scolding. It's not so impatient. It's a very different approach. So it doesn't solve everything. It solves the way you ride the carpet. The carpet's still going up and down.
So, you mentioned about it's softer. So is that the inner voice that you talk to yourself that you're talking about in terms of that being softer, that being less scolding?
Well, if you're in a high beta brainwave, your brain is constantly telling you you're not good enough, you're fat, you're ugly, you've done enough. And in that brain of beta, what you're doing is you're protecting yourself constantly. So you're having conversations, fictitious conversations in your head with somebody, you're arguing with them, but actually what you're doing is you're projecting your insecurity into their voice. Their voice is speaking back to your own insecurity about yourself, and you're arguing against it. And so the minute I started to realize that, I mean, that's like, ninja internal psyche based on survival. But the minute you move into alpha brainwave, that voice goes away. And in fact, the voice becomes one of very like, I love you, I respect you, I love you, I trust you, I am who I am. That's more than enough. These are the obvious internal dialogues that I'm having if I'm not sleeping or if something's going on. Those become my internal mantras, and that softens you. It calms your heart and clears your mind. And these things are changing as you soften yourself. You soften in every aspect. Your internal dialogue, your external dialogue, just jaggedness goes away. Why? Because your impatience has gone away. Why? Because you're not in a high beta brainwave. It's as simple as that. Change your brainwave and then it all sorts itself out.
What does an adaptable person look like? In terms of, if you could describe an adaptable person, what does that look like in a personality?
Having strong opinions held loosely. And somebody who asks questions inquisitively, even if they don't agree with what you're saying, but keep being inquisitive about the questions. Like, but why do you think that? Where did that come from? Okay, that's interesting. And then, oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay, not, I don't agree with you, and I think it should be like this. No, wait, let's listen to me. No, that's not being adaptable. Adaptability doesn't mean you need to agree. It means that you take in information. It's being agile in your optimism, not fragile in your optimism. When you're fragile in your optimism, you don't get your way, you become a sulky child. Agile is, my behavior is like, okay, I'm going to listen to you. Okay, well, what do you mean? Okay, I see what you're saying. I also know that most people's negativity is based on some trauma that they have. So when I see that and you understand that all of us carry trauma, then there would never be a prison system. There'd be a healing system, because anybody who's causing any stuff, they're just traumatized. They don't want to be causing. It's been terrorized and frustrated generation after generation, and they're carrying all these flippant energetic streams. And so we've just got to be in that sort of state of being empathetic. And when you are like that, you're adaptable, because that's what adaptability means.
I really like what you said about being more empathetic and trying to bring that healing into other people, because even when you just think back, there are so many traumatic things that happen to people as they go through life, and everybody is dealing with that in every situation that we're going into. So the empathy, I think, is really, really important.
But look, empathy for them is one thing. Your responsibility to heal them is a whole other thing. I'm also not going to be empathetic to you constantly if you're going to be an arsehole.
Yeah.
Like, I've also got boundaries. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so what are you doing to sort it out? Oh, you're doing that. Okay, that's good. Great. Go for it. Let me know how it goes. Oh, you're not doing anything. You think there's nothing wrong with you? Okay, well, then I'm going to have to stop engaging with you because I'm not going to be able to sit here constantly dealing with your trigger. It's also not my job.
How do you balance that in like a family dynamic, for example? So there might be some people where, their parents have had trauma backgrounds and that's expressing itself, but they're not necessarily doing the work. How do you do something like the boundaries that you're talking about with your parents, where it's like, that's my parents, I love my parents, I want to be around, they're there forever. So how does that, well, not forever, but you get what I mean? How does that express?
I think it's a learning exercise again with you and your family. You've got to get all of your family together to listen to a pod or share it on the family group and keep sending it and keep sharing it and keep sharing it. And so the language starts becoming a shared language. And if you've got a shared language, you can start to hold each other accountable in soft ways. My mom and I are very good like that. We understand the trigger, it's coming. There's a new way to argue, which is, I see your trigger, not that. But if you can't combine language, it's a very, very difficult thing to do, because if your parents are going left field and you're going right field and they're not adaptable and they're not willing to have some level of adaptability towards you learning together, I think it's a very hard thing, and you don't always have to be friends with your family. Remember, they're family, they're not friends. You can love them, but not like them. And that's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. Of course, it's okay. I'm not super close with my dad, but we're good. Hi, what's happening? How are you doing? How's your health? Do you need anything? Okay, great. So every 3 months. I didn't grow up with him, so what must I do? I'm cordial and we're warm. I love him, but I don't know him.
Yeah. It's such a tough balance, though. That's a really tough balance, I think.
I think as you get older, it'll be easier, bro. I'm 48. I almost moved into an alpha of my family now because I'm helping my parents and I'm helping them make decisions. So I'm in a different state to you. I imagine at your state, your parents still saw you as a young man. You know what I mean? You're a young man, so they kind of know better. Now that I'm 50, I'm nearly 50. I'm a man now. So I can make decisions. I've been successful. People trust me. I'm the oldest son. So I think maybe we're coming at it from different angles and different ages.
For me personally, my parents, so I have 3 sisters. So ever since we were like 16, 17, 18, they've treated us like, if I ask them a question, it's like, well, what do you think you should do? What is going on the inside? Yeah. So I've had that kind of independence since I was 18. Yeah. So I'm quite comfortable in terms of with my family, like we're pretty good, But I do have a few friends and things like that who that dynamic with their parents is a really tough one. And so that's where I'm asking you about it, because I've seen some of those behaviors that you're talking about where for me, they're quite foreign, if that makes sense, because I don't really get triggered by my parents. I would live with my parents. If I wasn't married, I'd live with my parents. Yeah. I love my parents.
So you're still living at home, bro?
No. So I'm married now. So
thank God. Yes, you said so. I was going to tease you. I was setting you up to tease you bigly, but I'm glad you said that. Good. Okay, good. 34 staying at home. I was like, come on, man. Come on.
Well,
that's not good.
Parents.
That's not good.
Happily stay at home.
No, don't say that. You got to, Anyway, I get it. But I get it.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's really asking for, because there are a lot of people that are struggling in that dynamic. So just because it's easy for me to say from a position where that's a secure place. It's not a triggering space for me. But as someone who, it sounds like you've gone through some of those things, I'd love to hear from your perspective. Like, how did you get to that place, even with your mum, where you mentioned, now we have that shared language? Was that always there? Was that a new thing, or how did that come about?
There's a great line that says, your actions are so loud, I can't hear a word you're saying. And as I was evolving in my journey, my mom started seeing changes in me, I guess. And she started becoming curious about what I was doing, because I wasn't reacting and triggering in old ways. Yes. And so and then YouTube obviously became a thing, and I started sharing her with some of the stuff I was listening to. She didn't like everything I shared with her, but she slowly started getting into the stuff I started getting into. And I remember her coming to my first book launch, and she was in the audience, and I remember her looking at me in a very different way. I think she
Wow.
had realized that I'd like stepped into my
Yeah.
manhood, right? And
Yeah.
it was a very big success, and there was hundreds of people there, and I remember my mom was she it shifted for her.
Yes.
But with my dad, it's very interesting. You know, I got a stepdad that I love immensely, and obviously and like immensely,
Yeah.
and he lives with my mom. But I have a real dad who lives in Iran. He's on his fourth marriage. Great guy. I just never grew up with him. It wasn't great when we were together, but I didn't speak to him for 20 years. You know, I was just
Wow.
adamant in not having a relationship with him. I didn't need one because I wasn't happy in the relationship. He wasn't happy with me. I wasn't happy with him. I was like, it was not worthwhile going there. But you know, I started meditating quite heavily 2 years ago. And what started to happen, and this is an Einstein quote, and this really describes it perfectly. He said, the medicine of the future is the medicine of frequency. And what he meant by this is that we are all pockets of energy and information. This information is created by our thoughts, actions, and feelings. And so what has happened is that when you're repeating your life based on triggers, you're not changing your frequency. But when you start to change your frequency, because you've changed the way you think, act, and feel, the diseases you had based on that frequency fall off you because they're not relevant in the new frequency. And as you start to do this, your relationships start to heal without you trying to fix the relationship, but just by changing your frequency. So things sort themselves out by you changing your frequency without you actually having to sort them out specifically. So last year, July, my dad and I became friends by a sequence of unexpected things that happened. I had a week holiday with him in Turkey. First time I seen him in 20 years. Loved him, massaged him. Awesome to see him. I just loved him. And you know what? He hasn't changed a bit. But that wasn't the point.
Would you mind sharing
The point was,
series
I
of
see him.
events? Would you mind sharing the series of events? You don't have
So
to.
for the
if
very
you don't mind.
first time, I decided to wish him happy birthday. I'd never done that. And every year he would send me a happy birthday, I'd ignore it.
Wow.
So I decided, you know what? Stop being an arsehole, send him a birthday message. So I sent him a birthday message, and he responds immediately. He says, "I'm so happy to receive this. I just want to let you know, I think it's a bit of a far shot, but the family from Iran are all going to Turkey for a week holiday in 4 weeks' time, and we'd love for you to be there. The family's dying to see you. We haven't seen you for 20, 30 years. We'd love to see you." Cool. I initially say, not a chance. No thanks. I'm not going. And then I get a booking in Italy for a 3-day strategy session. And bada bing, bada bang, the 3-day strategy session ends on the Sunday. My family goes on holiday to Turkey on the Monday. They start their holiday on the Monday. So I was in Cape Town. I was being flown by a client to Italy. All I had to do was pay for the flight to Turkey and then back to South Africa. The client was paying. So it was just one internal flight or 2 internal flights I had to book.
Yes.
And it ended just before. I was still, I'm not going to go. And then I watched the Tom Cruise interview. And Tom Cruise had a very tough relationship with his dad. And on his dad, and for 10 years, he didn't speak for his dad. And on his 10th on his dad's deathbed, his dad requested to see him. And so he decided to go see his dad based on one rule that he made for himself. I'm not going to go see my dad. I'm going to go see a man that has made some mistakes in his life.
Wow.
And I realized that message was 100% for me, is that I got to stop thinking that he should have been a perfect dad. Like, it's okay. I've done well. I'm good. It's okay. He just went through, he was traumatized. Like, he didn't understand. He didn't know. He was unconscious.
Yes.
So that really changed everything for me, but that could only come from a new frequency state, And so when I heard that from Tom Cruise, I phoned my dad. I said, I'm coming. And we arrived, and it was hugs from the beginning. I just loved on him, bro. I loved on him. That's all I did for 5 days, and I left.
I think what I really like about what you're saying about the change of frequency is that something that we can do. Sometimes it feels like some of the things are out of our control, but that is firmly something that people can do for themselves, is change the frequency that they operate on and then see what happens to the rest of life, and I love that that's something you can be in control of.
You absolutely can be in control of it, but we've sometimes been duped into thinking we're not in control of it.
No, it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned about you have clients and you do strategy and things like that. So what are some of the things that you work with your clients on? And does that have anything to do with like leadership, or is it more about preparing for the future?
Well, leadership is preparing for the future. It's the same thing, isn't it?
True.
Who's implementing the strategy, the leaders, and then the rest of the organization. So it's always about leadership, always about the future, and always about your culture, because you can't think of one in unison. You have to think of it as a holistic process, because it all leads into each other. So all my work is focused on two things: is brain evolution and organizational restructuring. And when you do these two things, you do them in talks and workshops and masterclasses. You bring out the best in the room in those processes. And so this is kind of what I do, those two things.
Okay. Because I think I was wondering, because sometimes as an organization, you might separate out for example, the tech stack and what technology you need for the future, and the kind of what they call like the softer skills in terms of the leadership and that kind of side of things. So I
suppose tech is quite technical. I agree. Like engineering wouldn't be there, but culture and leadership and future strategy, that's a plane that's flying. Tech is aspects of it that has got a very speciality needed for it. You know what I mean? But I think flying the plane at large is those three things. It's leadership, it's future strategy, leadership, and culture, and how you're actually swinging between those. I don't think you can do them apart. Tech stack, totally different. Obviously, that's a different language. Okay,
that makes
literally sense. A different language.
Because it sounds like you're quite au fait though with some of the tech things and how they work and understanding what that can do.
Yes and no. My yes and no. I mean, I'm not techie. I'm much more human and strategy. And so for me, it's the humans operating the tech, the strategy, and the direction of the organization, the questions they should be asking. And that's kind of my sweet spot,
Okay. So just as we close, my final question for you is, what's a question that no one has ever asked you, but you wish that they had?
I've heard this at another pod. And even when I heard it on the other pod, I was like, wow, that is a hard question. A question that you didn't want something. I mean, that's a hard one. You should put a question together that leaves me on an up, not on a.
Leaves you on an up.
That's a hard one.
It means that you get to answer the question that no one's ever asked you, but you want to answer.
Oh, I know. But okay, hang on.
Okay, better question. What's a question that you would like to answer that would leave you on an up?
Yeah, well done. Good in re-engineering there. Good re-engineering.
Thank you. Adaptability.
Look, I think the most important thing is finding your space to evolve yourself as quickly as possible. And it's not really a question in any way. Is the question you should be asking me is, and the only question you should be asking is, how quickly can I change my awareness? How quickly can I bring calm to my heart? How quickly can I heal my past? How quickly can I become adaptable for the future? How quickly can I start to engage with new and exciting things that otherwise would be scary? That's it. That's your formula. Follow that formula. If you got to continuously work that formula. It's not slowing down. It's speeding up. So the only question you should be asking me is, how do I change my awareness as quickly as possible? That's all I have to keep doing all the time. It's what I'm doing constantly. Everything's about what's next. How do I evolve something else? How do I move towards something else? And this is, look, never been to university, never really had a proper job. I'm all self-taught. I now teach at universities and organizations. That's what I'm doing. And I think the proof's in the pudding. You're interviewing me. I don't even know who you are. And today I now start to like you, and you're my friend.
John, thank you so much.
These things happen. Yeah. Awesome. Pleasure. Thank you so much. Pleasure. Good to chat to you.
Likewise, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've enjoyed being challenged in some of my thoughts as well. So that's been really, really good fun. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My absolute pleasure.
And thank you guys for listening, and see you on the next episode. Bye. Thank you for watching this episode of the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, flick through our channel and there's loads more that you can watch. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can hear first when new episodes drop. We'll catch you on the next episode.